words just being present on the screen, into a live-action scene, a scene of this particular flat object positioned in front of the camera that had taken on a life of its own. At that time, Technicolor was still doing imbibition printing. Imbibition, or IB printing, was the dye transfer process that was the foundation of the Technicolor system. By means of filters, Technicolor would make a separation matrix from the original color negative for each of three colors, yellow, cyan, and magenta. To make a print, each matrix was immersed in a bath of the corresponding dye, which it would soak up, that is to say, imbibe. Each of the matrices was applied in turn to the print stock, each in correct registration with the others. All the photographic materials used in IB printing were monochrome, and the dyes were stable and resistant to fading, so the matrices and prints had a high degree of permanence. This is the head or tail, I don't know which, of the imbibition matrix for the magenta record. This material is beautiful to handle. It's more substantial than ordinary film. It's still pliable and limber, but in a different way. When IB release prints were ordered in large quantities, they were cheaper than other processes, and Technicolor was able to make money on the volume. But in the early 70s, Technicolor came to a critical moment. The manufacture of IB prints was labor-intensive, and labor costs were going up. At the same time, studios became less confident of the market for their product, and so began to order prints in smaller quantities. The only way Technicolor could offer IB printing and stay competitive with other processes was to automate, but they didn't have the resources to do so. A few years after we finished working on the film, the Hollywood plant stopped making IB prints. The People's Republic of China was interested in the IB process, but they didn't want the old machines. Technicolor built new machines for them, closed the Hollywood plant, and sold the old machines for scrap. A few months after the Hollywood plant closed, a display ad appeared in the Hollywood Reporter that took the form of a memorial announcement. It read, "In loving memory, IB, born 1927, died 1975. Hollywood's own dye transfer process whose life was unrivaled for beauty, longevity, and flexibility. We salute you." It was signed, "The Friends of IB." Here's the head of an IB print. Everything's in register and the soundtrack is correctly synchronized with the picture. Synchronization in 35 is to the middle of the frame. Here's another one, but there's no soundtrack. I forget where I found this piece. The chart is off-center in the frame because the camera had a silent aperture and the viewfinder was aligned for an Academy aperture. When sound came in, a place had to be found for the track, and the Academy aperture was the solution. The frame kept the same proportions, but it was made smaller and was shifted to one side. Here's a piece of film that to me is full of interesting incidents, none of them related to one another. And here is that figure who in some quarters is emblematic almost of film itself. She is called, most obviously because of her dress, the China Girl, an odious term, but it's universal and so it's hard to avoid. The China Girl is the most familiar of the many people who perform the same function. Like her, the others are all women and they are all anonymous. Here's one of her less well-known counterparts. Skin tones are the most important subject in films made in the industry, and skin tones are also the one subject in which the eye is most readily able to detect errors in color correction. The China Girl and her sisters are intended as examples of well-exposed skin tones, and they are used by motion picture laboratories as a guide in calibrating their equipment. Sometimes examples of standard reference colors are included in the scene as well. The usual procedure is to cut a few frames of the scene into the leader of the picture negative, and so she becomes a part of each release print. This figure's sex, her being in the margin of the film, her serving to establish and maintain a standard of correct appearance, these are aspects of a single question that deserves thought. Another example. And yet still another. In a literal sense, these women are just as much a part of the film as those images that are intended to be presented to our view. Yet their presence is invariably suppressed as being an intrusion, as being no proper part of the film. It is the people working behind the scenes, such as laboratory technicians, those people who dedicate their lives to rendering appearance perfect, who know these women best. Here's an attempt to convey something of the same information without having to rely on the human body. The panel at the upper left is meant to represent flesh. Here are some pieces of film that I think are interesting to look at. I don't remember where I found any of these, but I remember that the last piece came from the leader for one of the reels of the Honeymoon Killers.